My guest today has so many stories to tell that I worry a quick interview will not do him justice. So I really hope to bring him back on a future episode. But Randall Wong is known as Bud to most people who know him, and he was not only the longest serving judge in BC's history, but he was also the first Chinese-Canadian provincial crown counsel here. His parents owned the legendary diner, the Ovaltine Cafe, which is where he was inspired to get into law. And despite the amazing story he has about his own life, today we're talking about some other folks. Bud is currently the president of the board of directors of the Chinese-Canadian Military Museum Society here in Vancouver. He's got an interesting war story or two to tell us. Welcome, Bud.
Thank you.
So tell me about Force 136. What was that?
Well, it was a special commando unit where they recruited Chinese Canadians to do sabotage and spy behind Japanese lines and report back. They had to use Asians simply because if you're going to drop them behind enemy lines, they had a similar operation in Europe where they had Caucasians, but you had to use Asians, and certainly in Southeast Asia, occupied by the Japanese during the war, there were lots of Chinese-speaking Asians there. So they asked for volunteers of Chinese Canadians already in the Canadian Army, and those who volunteered were, and this was an operation operated by the British, not the Canadian Army, but they chose to recruit from Chinese Canadians serving in the Canadian Army.
This is in World War II.
World War II.
Okay.
And basically, you volunteered, and they had a code name, which was Secret Operation Executive Force 136.
Uh-huh.
And their code name for that operation was Operation Oblivion, because there's a good chance if you volunteer, you might not come back.
Yeah, I always thought that it was strange that they recruited Chinese Canadians to pose as Japanese soldiers, but that wasn't the case.
That wasn't the case. They were posed as civilians, and basically they were trained in radio and also sabotage, and they were also to recruit the local populace to assist them in the fight against the Japanese.
And this wasn't just in Japan. This was occupied territory.
This was occupied territory, such as, at that time, Malaya and Burma, primarily.
Uh-huh.
And once they volunteered, they had British Army instructors, and they were trained at Lake Okanagan near Kelowna, at a site called Commando Bay.
Commando Bay?
Yes.
On Okanagan Lake?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's still there today.
Okay.
And they were trained in guerrilla warfare, and also they were given cyanide pills that if you were about to be perhaps captured, obviously the Japanese would show you no mercy. So they would then use the cyanide pills.
Wow. How many Chinese Canadians served in World War II?
Basically, there were slightly over 600. There were some women, but they served in the office and administrative posts. Now, the 600 served in all of the services, namely the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force.
Right. Do we know how many people were in Force 136?
They think basically probably about 50 to 55.
Okay.
And they were all young men. They were probably 19 or 20 at that time.
Yeah. And none of them were allowed to talk about it for a long time. Like, this didn't come out for a while.
That's right. They were sworn to secrecy. They were told that they should not talk about it for at least 30 years. But that wasn't unusual because people knew that World War II veterans and returning soldiers didn't like to talk about the
Right.
war.
Uh-huh.
And basically, they only opened up when they were elderly.
Huh. And so they just said, "Oh, I was in the war." Like they wouldn't really.
Well,
talk
they
about
may have mentioned that they were in Force 136,
Sure.
and that they did commando work, but they didn't talk about the details.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, Ottawa has no official record of them because it was strictly a British operation.
But they were Canadian recruits.
That's right.
Huh.
Right. And the only archive of their service and the details are found only in the Imperial Archive in London.
Fascinating. Huh. Well, I hope to learn more about this in the future. I'm going to have you back. We're going to talk to you about Kim Wong in the next season, if you will come back and talk to us next season. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us this story.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, Nina is going to be on the street talking to some folks.